anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Most people hear that line so often they stop thinking about what it actually means. But in one body cam video that later exploded online, a man who believed he was simply helping officers clear things up ended up talking himself directly into felony charges. At one point during the stop, the officer says, "So you admit you were there that night?" And the man responds almost casually, "Yeah, but I didn't do anything." That single sentence became the centerpiece of the prosecution's case. Not physical evidence, not DNA, not fingerprints. His own words. One piece of knowledge can change how a situation ends for you. Subscribe now so you're prepared. Then share this video and tell me what you think about it in the comments. And the disturbing part is that at the beginning of the encounter, he wasn't even considered the primary suspect. So how does someone go from witness to person of interest to defendant in less than an hour? And why do so many defense attorneys, former detectives, and even retired judges repeat the same warning over and over? Never speak to police without a lawyer present. Because the gap between innocent until proven guilty and the reality of probable cause is much bigger than most people realize. The man at the center of this case was a 32-year-old warehouse supervisor named Daniel Mercer. By all accounts, he lived a fairly ordinary life in a mid-sized suburban community outside of Phoenix. No violent criminal history, no gang affiliation, no dramatic backstory. On the night everything changed, Mercer had just finished a late shift and stopped at a convenience store near his apartment complex. About 30 minutes earlier, police had received reports of an altercation nearby involving possible property damage and an alleged assault outside a bar. Mercer didn't know any of that. He saw police lights in the parking lot, assumed officers were responding to something unrelated, and kept walking toward his car. Then an officer called out to him, "Hey man, mind talking to us for a second?" Now, this is important. A lot of encounters begin exactly like this. Calm, informal, almost friendly. No handcuffs, no yelling, no dramatic takedown. Just conversation. And that's often where people make decisions that later change their lives. Mercer reportedly believed cooperating would help him get home faster. According to later court filings, he voluntarily agreed to answer questions. At first, the exchange seemed routine. "Where are you coming from tonight?" "Work." "You been drinking?" "No." "You know anything about a fight down the street?" "No, not really." But here's where things changed. One officer mentioned that witnesses described someone wearing a dark hoodie and jeans leaving the scene. Mercer happened to be wearing a dark hoodie and jeans. The officer then asked if he had been near the bar district earlier that evening. And Mercer hesitated. Yeah, I passed through there for a minute." That hesitation immediately changed the tone of the encounter. You can actually hear it happen in the body cam audio. The questions become sharper, faster, more specific. "What time were you there? Who were you meeting? Why didn't you mention that earlier?" Mercer began trying to explain himself, and the more he explained, the worse the situation became. At one point, he reportedly said, I saw people arguing, but I stayed out of it." Then officers locked onto that statement. "So now you were close enough to see the argument." "No, I just mean I saw people yelling." "Okay, but earlier you said you didn't know anything about it." This is the moment many legal analysts point to, not because Mercer confessed to a crime, but because the officers now had inconsistencies. Small inconsistencies, maybe. Innocent inconsistencies, possibly, but inconsistencies nonetheless. And in police investigations, inconsistent statements can rapidly transform someone from a casual contact into a potential suspect. Within minutes, officers asked Mercer to sit on the curb. Then they requested permission to search his vehicle. He nervously laughed and said, I guess. Inside the car, officers found a damaged cell phone and a jacket with what appeared to be fresh stains on the sleeve. Mercer immediately tried to explain again. "That's not blood. I work in a warehouse." But by that point, officers were no longer casually chatting. They were building probable cause. Now, let's pause here because this is where the legal misunderstanding begins. A lot of people grow up believing innocent until proven guilty means police need strong evidence before detaining, searching, or arresting someone. But generally, that's not how the system works in the early stages. Innocent until proven guilty is primarily a trial standard. It governs what prosecutors must prove in court beyond a reasonable doubt. probable cause is much lower. In many jurisdictions, probable cause simply means officers have enough facts and circumstances for a reasonable person to believe a crime may have occurred and the individual may be connected to it. That's a massive difference. A court may later determine the person is completely innocent. Charges may be dropped. A jury may acquit, but the arrest can still happen first. And this is why voluntary statements matter so much. Police are trained to observe inconsistencies, nervous behavior, timeline changes, and partial admissions. Even innocent people often speak imprecisely under stress. Memory gaps happen. People try to sound helpful. They guess at times. They fill silence. Unfortunately, those explanations can sometimes create more suspicion rather than less. Now, officers are generally allowed to ask questions during consensual encounters. Citizens are also generally allowed to decline questioning and ask whether they are free to leave. But many people never realize the interaction stopped being casual. And by the time they do, the officers may already believe they have enough reasonable suspicion to continue detaining them. That distinction matters enormously because once the legal threshold shifts, the encounter changes with it. And in Mercer's case, that shift happened fast. The body cam footage reportedly shows an officer stepping aside and quietly telling another, his story keeps changing. Moments later, Mercer was asked to stand up and place his hands behind his back. Am I being arrested? At this point, you're being detained. For what? We're investigating. Now the tension spikes. Mercer begins protesting. I didn't do anything. Then cooperate. I have been cooperating. And this is where many encounters spiral. The citizen feels trapped because they believe they're innocent. The officers become more suspicious because the citizen is emotional, defensive, or talking too much. Both sides begin interpreting each other negatively. Officers searched the vehicle more thoroughly. They photographed the stains. They seized Mercer's phone. Then came the statement that prosecutors would later emphasize repeatedly. I was there, okay, but I didn't touch anybody. Again, Mercer appeared to believe he was clarifying. Instead, investigators interpreted it as placing himself directly at the scene. By the end of the night, he was booked on suspicion of assault and criminal damage. Now, this is where the deeper constitutional issues start becoming important. Generally speaking, police do not need a conviction to arrest someone. They need probable cause. And probable cause can be built from multiple small pieces: witness descriptions, location proximity, conflicting statements, behavior, physical evidence, admissions. Individually, each piece may look weak. Together, officers may argue the totality justified the arrest. Vehicle searches are another major issue here. In many states, consent searches are incredibly common. Officers ask casually, "You mind if we take a look?" People often say yes because they fear refusal makes them look guilty. Legally, refusing consent generally cannot be treated as proof of guilt by itself. But socially and psychologically, many people feel intense pressure to comply. And once consent is given, courts often give officers broad latitude regarding what they can inspect. This is also where officer discretion matters. Did officers have legal authority to continue investigating Mercer? Possibly, but having authority does not automatically mean every tactical decision was wise, ethical, or necessary. Critics later argued officers developed tunnel vision. Supporters argued Mercer repeatedly changed his story and voluntarily placed himself near the incident. Both perspectives matter, because accountability discussions become meaningless if people refuse to acknowledge nuance. In the weeks after the arrest, investigators reviewed surveillance footage from nearby businesses, and that footage reportedly complicated the prosecution's case. Video appeared to show Mercer near the area earlier in the evening, but not participating in the alleged assault itself. Additional witness interviews also conflicted with initial statements gathered at the scene. Eventually, several felony charges were reduced. Others were dismissed entirely. But by then, Mercer had already spent time in jail, paid legal fees, missed work, and watched parts of his interrogation circulate online after public records requests. According to later reporting, Mercer filed complaints alleging officers pressured him during questioning and ignored exculpatory details early in the investigation. The department defended the officer's conduct, stating the detention and arrest were supported by the evidence available at the time. And legally, that may very well be true. But public reaction was deeply divided. Some people looked at the case and said, if he had just stayed quiet and asked for a lawyer, none of this would have happened. Others argued the police were doing exactly what the public expects investigators to do: follow leads, compare statements, and act quickly after a reported violent incident. And honestly, both realities can exist at the same time. That's what makes cases like this so important. The core issue isn't whether police should investigate crimes. Of course they should. The issue is understanding how easily ordinary conversation can become evidence, especially when people wrongly assume innocence protects them from legal jeopardy in the early stages of an investigation. Because the justice system does not begin at trial. It begins during the encounter, during the questioning, during the roadside conversation people think is informal. And this is why experienced defense attorneys constantly repeat the same principle. Silence is not an admission of guilt. Requesting a lawyer is not obstruction. Asking, "Am I free to leave?" is not disrespectful. Those are constitutional protections. Now, to be fair, officers also face difficult realities. They often arrive with incomplete information. Witnesses can lie. Victims can misidentify suspects. Scenes are chaotic. Decisions happen fast. But constitutional rights exist precisely because investigations are imperfect. And this is where accountability matters most. Could officers legally detain Mercer based on the evolving facts? A court might say yes. Could Mercer have avoided much of the situation by speaking less and requesting counsel earlier? Very possibly. Could the investigation have been handled more carefully once inconsistencies emerged? Critics certainly think so. And these are the uncomfortable gray areas that body cam footage exposes better than almost anything else. The final lesson here is not never cooperate or police are always wrong. It's understanding that legal systems operate on thresholds most people do not fully understand. Reasonable suspicion is not proof. Probable cause is not guilt, and innocence alone does not stop an arrest from happening. So if you ever find yourself in a police encounter, remain calm. Do not argue on the roadside. Do not physically resist. Document what happened if legally permitted in your area, and ask whether you are free to leave. And if questioning becomes accusatory, clearly request a lawyer and stop answering substantive questions. Because bad cases are fought in courtrooms, not won in parking lots. And one conversation can sometimes create years of legal consequences. So, what do you think? Was this lawful police work based on evolving evidence, or did investigators take a routine encounter way too far after focusing on the wrong person?